Mei Ting, and this is Spill the Tea, a podcast by Penang Institute. In one of our previous episodes, we spoke about Hinbas Depot as an arts and community hub. Within the depot is COEX at Kilang Besi, one of Penang's latest community hubs, which actively serves as a platform for collaborative events. Now, the transformation and management of spaces potentially, I feel, alter the use of the site and the experience it may provide. But what do architects actually have to consider as they embark on each project? And how does restoring heritage buildings differ from designing new ones? To answer these questions and more, we have with us today Mei Chee Seong, co-founder of award-winning architecture firm ALM Architects and the brain behind COEX. Welcome to the studio, Mei.
Yeah, hi. Good morning, Mei Ting. Yeah, thanks for having us here.
Okay, so Mei, let's start by talking about COEX. First thing is, what exactly does COEX mean?
Yep. When we start off COEX, we need to think about what shall we name it so that the name itself will explain what the space is. Automatically, we are architect firm. By nature, we will actually think about just to put our name on the signboard, then tell people that, yeah, hi, this is ALM Architects. But it doesn't serve a purpose for us to want to reach out to more publics because we don't want it to seem like to be too professionals. We want to be more connected to the communities, so that COEX come across our mind where it gives us suggestions where we can name it in many ways that we think it appropriate to us. Like for example, for us, our officials' intention is to want to make it a community's experiment. But of course, others can name it as a coffee experience, courtyard experiments, or collaborate expert, or whatever co and whatever X. So it is sort of a blank canvas to everyone where we can actually define the space in the most comfortable way that suits every individual. So that is the idea of COEX. So for us, we want to call it a community experiment. Is in line with our intentions to make it a more forgiving space, because experiment means we engage mistake, we encourage mistake. We want to push things to the boundary. We want to do things that are not allowed to do in many others part of the world. So this is sort of a laboratory for everyone to experiment their idea. So from those experiments, we can actually see there is a lot of possibilities where we can never observe it in outside world. So this also explain why we want to call our place COEX, and it explain the purpose of our intentions of the community engagement.
Okay, so that means whatever events which take place in COEX basically would actually break stereotypes.
Yes.
Because it becomes an experimental space as you envision it to be. Right? Yeah. Okay. So because I realized that, well, some of the past events that I have attended myself, and also I see some of the lineups are very interesting. So for the listeners who have never been to COEX, there are things as wide-ranging as art exhibitions, performances, forums, literary discussions, business networking even, and also stand-up comedy nights, which I truly enjoy. I think that is such a great place for people to actually try out and see where their talents lie. And exactly as you say, it's a very forgiving space for people to see wherever their interests and their talents lie.
Not only the event, we have also others, so we call them villager, where they reside in our space to make it their workshop, their base. For example, we have a community library called Rong Kong Si. We have an independent bookstore called Books Islands, and also we house a studio of Penang City Eye, as well as Ombak Potehi. And also we have a few chefs like Yumin. She actually carry out her own private kitchens at our place. So those are the regulars, our villagers, where they use our space in regular basis.
I think that's a very cute term to call
Villager in a city.
Exactly, villagers in a city. I think that really creates. I mean, from the word villager itself, I think it creates such a sense of community in within that space that you have created. So and how does because I know ALM Architects, basically your office is right there within COEX. So how exactly does architecture tie in with COEX?
Yeah, that is something COEX won't exist without ALM, and ALM won't be able to grow to another dimensions without riding on the COEX platform. Why we want to come across this idea of having our businesses into a community, that is due to over 20 years of our development. We find that we had already come to bottlenecks where we start to stay in a comfort zone, where we have a good client base, we already have our own so-called reputations, we have developed our own style, but that in another way is actually dangerous for us, where we will actually keep on stop developing other than just making money. So what we think about the best way for us to make architecture more vibrant is to connect it to community. So this also go in line with our architectural so-called philosophy, where we started off as a very typical architects where we design a building. And we find that to design a building is not enough. We have to create experience. So that is a second stage of our architectural finding. But to create an experience is still not enough for us, because we find that the words creating is a bit intrusive. We want to be a bit more, make architecture a bit more gentle, a bit more humble. So that's why our latest thought about architect's role is to curate experience. Curate is a word where it's more gentle, it's more stand back, a more humble approach, more suggestive way of expressing architecture idea rather than very impulsive way. So in order to do that, in order to curate more experience, we need to have an experimental ground. We need to know which experience is good for architecture. We need to be inspired not only by the nature but also by people. So that is a core of architecture. So to put us in the mid of community, I think is just to soak ourselves in the communities so that we can get that very organically, spontaneously, and without any so-called expectations.
Okay. So like you were saying, curation is definitely better than creation.
Yes.
Yeah. So curation in the sense that you let ideas flow more organically between people to people. I mean, with architecture in the background for sure, but like in a more softer way, as you put it just now.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting. So it's no longer like very hard architecture where you just create the building and then expect people to fit in, but now you are fitting together with the inhabitants, basically the users.
Yes. In fact, the words curations normally happen in art exhibitions, where we want to curate an art exhibitions. That give me a lot of inspirations because we find that the audience themselves is actually a creator. The art is actually just a media or just to transpire the idea, but the audience in fact create their own art in mind. So can we use this or transplant this idea into architecture where the audience are creating their own experience and we are only the one who curate it to make it happen. And interestingly is that everyone may have different feeling of a space, so that is something interesting and make it more diverse and even more democratic in terms of architecture.
Okay, that's super interesting actually. Because I've always thought of architecture as people creating a big beautiful space, and after that people just go in and admire the place or inhabit the place. And I think it's certainly a great idea to expand beyond what you have already established to almost like break through your comfort zone, I guess, of your architecture firm. And I think in that way, I think that's really a lot of space for growth And of course, it serves the community very well. But also, apart from COEX, I understand that ALM Architects, you have been winning a lot of awards for many different types of projects. One of it is actually, or two of it, I think, is the heritage conservation projects. For example, the restoration of Chia Kongsi and the adaptive reuse of Gudang Cafe. So what are your thoughts exactly in when it comes to all these heritage preservation projects?
When we come across heritage preservation projects, we have always in mind that we want to preserve something. That is, we treat heritage building as historical artifacts. But in certain extent, it doesn't work that way because heritage is something, a living building where people live in it. And our lifestyle change from time to time. So our lifestyle may not suit to the building where the original is. So we need to do some modifications. So we always struggle in between how to modify it and how to make it, how to preserve it as a heritage artifacts. And there will be always a contradicting elements in between. So we come across with an idea, especially when I do Gudang Cafe,
Yes.
where I have to use it as a cafe, where it originally is warehouse, is Gudang. Somehow it contradicts and we have to add on this element. And what is elements that we can add on and not so-called striking off each other, but complement each other. So I come across with an idea of timescaping. Timescaping is just like landscaping, where the trees grow organically. The trees will add on to the elements of nature, and by itself it become part of the nature. So what if, let's say, whatever contents that we put into the building, we will add on to the history of the building. So it will be a heritage in many years later. So that is sort of a growing or organically growth of a memory of a building. So I want to make it a timescaping rather than a time freezing.
Okay. Yeah, I think timescaping, this is the first time I'm hearing this term timescaping because it's always landscaping.
Yes.
So, but wow, timescaping, meaning, does that mean, that you are trying to make sort of like, okay, if it is like a heritage building, but also make it viable and make it relevant to today's users, but at the same time, still not forgetting what it was in the past. Is
Yes,
that what
I
it
think
means?
both way.
Okay.
When we use heritage building, we always want to use it in very careful manner. We always worried that we may spoil the essence of the heritage. But I find that we shouldn't too constrained about that.
Okay.
You can imagine that if we are too focused on just preserving the history, then who is going to record our current life? And many years later, I think we should be brave enough to add on layers to the building. So the old and new will actually coexist together, and it will compose a very beautiful storyline of that building. So next time when you go in after 100 years, our so-called involvement become part of the history, and that grows. So I think if we think it in that way, we should be brave enough to even put in new elements in.
Okay. Yeah, it's better than to freeze it in time. If let's say it's 100-year-old building, let's say built in 1900, I mean, we still have to keep it relevant and add in our own story to it, instead of, let's say, by 2100, if anyone is still alive, by then would, not only see the building used back in 1900, but also see how it has evolved according to time, how people have used the space in the different eras. Okay.
You can imagine if in Rome, everyone after Rome will stay in the Rome as how the Rome era is. You will then when you look at it now, it will be how boring the city is. So if you can add layer to the city fabric and the history of the city, then it will give them more vibrant elements. That I will call it a timescaping.
Okay, very interesting concept. I guess that would also happen to, I mean, it doesn't have to be just heritage buildings that we think, or rather we classify as heritage buildings nowadays. So basically, we are also thinking of, let's say, buildings which are built now or in the 1990s or the 80s, or the Art Deco type of building. Yes, in a sense, it is heritage, but it is also not like the colonial history type of era building. So, in that sense, at every time or every era, there will be a history if we were to look at it, I mean, from the
Yeah.
future, lah, basically.
I hope that we can live very honestly as it is today. Not
Yeah.
we don't live in yesterday, although we
Yes.
respect what happened before. So I think that will be very interestingly, and we doesn't need to worry about whether we are conserving or we are destroying the history, because whether you like it or not, we are contributing to
Yes.
layers of the history.
Yeah.
So we will let our new generations to read that in their own interpretations. It doesn't need to curate for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I find it very interesting. For example, your Chia Kongsi project. I mean, we can see obviously the building is an old building, but the space now is also being used for many more modern sort of events. For example, the recent Georgetown Festival, they use the space, and so I think, in time to come, we can also see it as yes, it is an ancestral house, but it is also used as a public art space also in
Yeah.
year 2023, let's
Yes.
say.
Yes.
If anyone actually documents
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. It's coexist together.
Yeah, exactly. Coexisting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, I think that's really food for thought for even the other heritage buildings in Penang. And I think just by looking at, for example, all the cafes and hotels that occupy heritage houses in Penang now, that we are actually adding layers to the story instead of just freezing.
Yeah. So
history.
sometimes I'm thinking of, are we forgiving enough for those naughty guys there where they want to challenge the
Right.
thought of conservation?
Yes.
So probably we should give some room for that to happen.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it should be a one-sided argument. There should be almost like a debate
Yes.
to it, because many different people have different thoughts
Yep.
on it, and we should not only just be listening to one side of the story,
Yeah.
basically. Okay, that's interesting. But you also work a lot on public service projects, right? One of which is the award-winning project, the Office in the Park, which is the MBPP office situated in Penang City Park. And apart from that, there's also the Miami Lavatory, which is the public toilet at Miami Beach, Batu Ferringhi. I noticed that both projects give great views actually of the natural surroundings. For example, the greens at the MBPP office, and also the sea for the public toilet. So what is the idea behind this? And of course, on top of the environmental part, how different is it when you have to design a public space, a public building?
Yeah, I always like to push things to the limit and
Okay.
redefine the usage of a space. For example, when we have an opportunity to design a government's department's office, can we go beyond the prototype of typical symmetrical government building to a different way? And in this case, we are not doing it just for the sake of doing the different things, but we have an opportunity of the site is actually sited in next to the forest and the park.
Right.
So we are thinking of instead of putting the building in a park, can we actually invite the park into the building? So instead of building a big building, we can actually split the building into a smaller so-called compartment where link each other with a very organic courtyard, where the courtyard is actually part of the continuous pathway from the forest and the garden. So it will be seamlessly invite the landscape into the building. And at the same time, when we reduce the volume of the big building into a smaller building, so it is easier or more energy efficient to manage the building, and people can actually have a short breath of fresh air when they travel from one department to another. And this also make a building smaller, and I'm happy to go back and visit where they doesn't need to switch on the light because all their sitting are not more than 12 feet from the window.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of natural lighting involved.
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
So that also give them a opportunity to be more connected to the nature. They not even put up a curtain because there's no glare because they are surrounded by green.
Greens.
So that is another opportunity where we can make our building more transparent, as well as the building are not the departments are locked, but the building are accessible by publics even though at night. So it could be part of the parks where. This is part of our purpose where we can invite or extended the park into the building.
That's very interesting because, in the past, whenever we imagine a government building, we're always imagining a very symmetric, almost boring building, from office to office, all enclosed and air conditioned. But to imagine it being part of nature, and as you said, inviting nature into the building itself, I think that is really refreshing. That's a very interesting concept.
Yes.
I mean, with the Miami lavatory, that one also very interesting. Go to the toilet with a view.
Yes, that is also quite controversial. Sometimes we need to think about how people look at it, and it's very interesting, and we all understand what that concern is.
Yes,
but sometimes
privacy.
we just want to have a bit of fun to challenge the perceptions of everyone. Why not we do it like this? What happens if we have these problems and we just solve it?
Yeah.
I think that is one of the toilets that work beyond a toilet, where you can be part of your destinations. So the toilet shouldn't be just a place to solve your problems, the daily problems, but it can be a wow experience for you as well. So that is how we can curate an experience just by going to a toilet.
Oh wow! Exactly. I mean, when we think about public toilets, first of all, whenever we think of public toilets, in Penang, actually, we'll be like, okay, quickly go and be done and leave. But like now that you have, recurated the space, recurated the toilet space and use, actually, I think that's super interesting. Not only for locals, but like for visitors to actually see that. You can use the toilet in a different way.
Yeah, and another bonus is it creates a lot of controversial discussion on that.
Which is even better.
Yes. That is what another so-called useful elements of architecture.
Yes. It becomes a conversation piece.
Yes, why not?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. Imagine debating over a toilet.
Yes.
Interesting. So, and also, like, nowadays, I feel like when it comes to architecture and really a lot of other industries also, people are always talking about ESG. Okay, so it's really, people are talking about green buildings, and green buildings, sometimes they are now seen as like the gold standard, I think, in sustainable architecture. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, we are also part of the GBI facilitators team. I think GBI has done a good job of accrediting all green building, but also at the same time, I'm thinking of what we can do beyond that, because some of the elements which is quite difficult to quantify in terms of GBI. For example, how much, for example, in COEX, we're using almost 100% of the material as recycled material, and it's very difficult to quantify that. But other than that, we also tolerate with a minimum finishings. Like for example, we just use bare concrete rather than have more tiles. So that is something like we just reduce the usage of the materials. And also in the process of doing that, we engage local craftsmen, not only to cut short the transportation's carbon footprint from the factories to our place, but it also encourage them to reach out to more communities, and we actually bring more business opportunity to local businesses. So those are interesting part where we are not able to quantify within the GBI's frameworks. So those are the areas where we accidentally explore into it. And also at the same time, in the process of doing that, we find a lot of interesting way to salvage, reclaim timber.
Okay.
Reclaim timber. So those are the know-how that we learn throughout the process, and the process is not easy. It costs even more than we buy a new furniture from IKEA. So, but what we want to do, that the meaning behind that is actually we take this as an opportunity to learn how to deal with the reclaimed material, as well as how to deal with the limitations of the craftsmanships. Sometimes we even change our design to suit to the abilities of the craftsmen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, for the sake of our listeners, GBI is
Green Building Index.
okay. All right. So that one is actually like a standard, is it?
Yes, it's a green building accreditation standard for Malaysia.
Okay. I find the part about using local businesses very interesting, instead of constantly perhaps importing goods and materials from other countries, but in fact I would say to lower the carbon footprint. I think this is actually quite an interesting way to, well, first of all, you're helping local businesses.
Yes.
And you're lowering carbon footprint. And also the part about reclaimed materials and reclaimed timber.
Yeah.
So how do you source then? For
Yes.
like, for example.
Yeah, that is another interesting part. But before I touching that, I want to go back a little bit of how does it contribute further to the reducing of carbon footprint, because the process of the learning process of using reclaimed material actually develop new skill for the craftsmen themselves. So they can expand their business in more diverse possibilities. So that will also open up the future's possibility of not only us but others communities or even the craftsmen to extend their service to service more potential customers. Yeah, so there's one part. Sorry, I missed up your questions.
How do you then source for things like reclaimed?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Timber.
Yeah, we have learned in the process where it's not for us to source the material, but for the material to come to us.
Oh,
so that is the other way around, because for reclaimed timber, there is nothing we can specify and buy in the market. But what we can do is that we can spread out the news, or we can let people know that we have interest on that. And then when people come across this material, they will offer it to us. So this happened in COEX. But in order to do that, we must allow a few things to happen. First is human people, let others people know we love that. Secondly is time. We cannot get it in a clicks of weeks, but we also blessed that we built COEX during pandemics. So what we have is time. So we have a year time to let those opportunity to happen.
Yes, and I think very obvious in COEX is that long timber table right in front of your office, basically that very communal like table, I would say. I mean, that is a huge piece of wood.
Yes.
And so that one I suppose must be reclaimed. I mean, like a timber which you sourced from somewhere local.
Actually the timber we source from local, but the timber is come from it's a pine wood, where it come from probably a Poland or Russian pine. Why we can have that is because of that is actually industrial waste in a timber industry. That is a core of a timber where after they slice the timbers out for others usage, that is a core where as a byproduct of the industrial. So what they do is that they use it as a wrapping of a container to protect a machines, which the machines is shipped to Gurun, Kedah. So by unwrapping the container, this is a discard material where they want to throw it away, because there's no market, and normally the people handling that, they do not know who others people can have a good use of that. So normally they will be throwing away. or just ask around, whoever wants, just take it. And I'm quite lucky as one of my friends, he alert me and we can have a chance to salvage all that.
Wow, I
Yeah.
think that is an amazing story for that very big table in
Yes,
COEX
yes.
actually.
And interestingly is that when we salvage it, we make a decision of not to make a single cut to the lumber, because if there is a log, normally we will slice it out to a smaller, which is more manageable. But we try to keep it as their original length and the shapes. And but in order to make it useful, we have to change our design. We have to suit our design to the length of the timber. So it not only become the long table, it become a benches of a long table, and it's also become the stage inside our office. Yeah.
Wow, I think that's truly very ESG friendly. Yeah,
Yes.
because like instead of it going to waste and just being discarded, it's
Yeah.
now really being put in good use, and in fact it is, I would say, the center of attraction for the public when they
Yes.
go to COEX also.
Yes, because the good use doesn't mean we need to so-called sacrifice or compensate in terms of usage.
Yeah.
But in fact, it not only we not only didn't compensate, but in fact it become a center of energy of the
Yes.
entire place. So I
Yeah.
think that is the interesting part of it, because we believe that the material itself or the texture itself will tell their own story. So that will add on the layer of story where architects cannot do it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is part of timescaping.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Because we're not in full control anymore. I think I would say, okay, not we lah. Maybe the architects should try to think of it in a way that they do not necessarily have to be in full control and using new materials all the time anymore. So it's letting the story be told organically, and if it comes lah, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So May, to wrap up this episode, right? How do you see, like what sort of elements do you see would be the standards of architecture in the near future?
This is a big question.
This is a big question, I know.
That none of architects are there to define that,
Okay.
because to me, architecture is not something defined by architects.
Okay.
So architects is not although we understand architect as a building designer, which we learn from university, but now I tend to define architects as a curator. So we has to be more humble, and we would like to curate that experience or the opportunity for the end user to define their own space experience. So that is what we hope, that architecture will be more inclusive and everyone can be architects.
All right,
Yeah.
May, thank you very much for speaking with me today. I've been speaking to Mei Chee Seong, founder of ALM Architects and COEX. This is Spill the Tea, a podcast by Penang Institute.
Thank you.